Welcome to Wales Tech Week 2021. Thank you to our partners. Enjoy the session.
Well, good afternoon and welcome back if you joined us in this morning's Compound Semiconductor cluster sessions. This follows on quite neatly. If you're new to it, then there'll still be something that you'll learn from Compound Semiconductor point of view. We have three speakers lined up this afternoon, and it's geared around the economy, the impact of the cluster on the economy, and the provisions, particularly in higher education, for recruits and potential job opportunities or job opportunity seekers in the compound semiconductor sector. So without further ado, I'm first going to hand over to Max Munday from Cardiff University. Max, as part of the Compound Semiconductor Cluster Strength in Places program, is running a particular program on evaluation, looking at the economic impact of the cluster on South Wales and the wider region. So over to you, Max. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so this is several people who've actually contributed to some of the material in our presentation, in the presentation here today. But basically, what we've been interested in is to examine really what the compound semiconductor cluster, and that includes both the industry elements of the cluster and the institutional elements of the cluster, what they actually mean for the South Wales economy, and I guess more importantly, what they might mean as the cluster actually develops, as we hope through time. And myself and my colleagues who are detailed on this slide, we also try and provide economic intelligence to members of the cluster to inform their decision making. So, can I first of all, I mean, I'm talking about economic impact. Selfishly, I'm interested in Wales here, what this means for the Welsh economy. I don't doubt that the compound semiconductor cluster also has implications for the wider UK economy. But let's just focus in on Wales for a moment today. I think it's important to place the cluster of companies in their regional economic context, and that's what I want to do. I just want to explain. I'm trying to explain here why the cluster of firms and their activity is important, given some persistent economic problems facing the Welsh economy. So I've tried to pick this out. I'm sorry, the print's it's a little bit busy, this slide, but I've tried to point out on this some issues of recent regional economic context that are that contextualize the activity within the cluster. First of all, on the left-hand side of my diagram there, what are issues that we're worried about at the moment? Well, we're concerned in the Welsh economy about falling levels of manufacturing employment, pressure on manufacturing exporters. Some of our traditional exporters have seen their markets badly damaged over the last couple of years. Low levels of business expenditure on research and development in Wales. Again, a persistent problems. Now, some of these issues tie together because, if some of our leading firms are under pressure, that might place pressures for our graduates in getting new opportunities in the Welsh economy. We've also, in the last couple of years, seen the exit of some large inward investors, and problems of relatively poor embeddedness of some elements of Welsh manufacturing in local supply chains. So what does that all take? Now, many of those bubbles in that left-hand column, they're interrelated with one another. But what does that mean? does that? What do we conclude from that? Well, these factors they actually work to contribute to poor regional productivity growth, a low skills equilibrium, really, in as much as as firms decline, as high quality manufacturing declines, there's less demand for skills. Well, if there's less demand for skills in the long term, there'll be less supply of those skills coming forward. So you have it, if you like, a low skills equilibrium. Perhaps we're getting into a situation now where we have few manufacturing sectors with long-term comparative advantage. Now, in the context of those problems, the compound semiconductor cluster is interesting because what does it offer? What is it starting to offer? Well, it's offering in the green bubbles on the right there additional employment in high value add activity, potential for export growth, and that's very important where we're seeing pressure on many of our existing exporters. New opportunities for graduates. They're big users of graduates, these firms. We're seeing these firms, they're associated with relatively high levels of R&D spending, and together, well, we might hope the development of these companies might be associated with a boost to regional productivity growth. So, just a couple more slides, just on context, because I'm going to talk about the impact of the cluster in as we saw it at the end of 2020. Well, it's no news to you that 2020 was a very bad year for global, UK and the Welsh economy. We've seen revealed on this slide, we've seen a very sharp decline in GDP, Welsh output. Some economic forecast groups are projecting that it could be some years before Welsh output recovers to its pre-output levels. And we're also starting to see evidence, and I haven't got time to go through today, that Wales might have been particularly badly hit by the pandemic because it has a relatively high specialisation in sectors that were particularly badly hit, like tourism and hospitality, and leisure. So the recent context for cluster development is one of declining output growth, and what we see is on this side we see that sector prospects have actually been very, very variable. I mean in the top left-hand bar chart, column chart there, you see movements in the Welsh indices of production for various industries. You can see that many of our industries suffered very, very badly in the year to the final quarter of last year. And in the bottom right-hand corner, I mean, I've already spoken about exports, but we also see exports declining. And you'll remember at the end of 2020, we had the end of the transition agreements with the EU. Okay, so in that context of problems, output losses, variation in prospects between manufacturing sectors, why is the compound semiconductor cluster of interest, and why was it of particular interest? I mean, we're trying to set a baseline in 2020 of the economic contribution of the cluster. Well, why was it important? Well, try to crystallize it on this slide. Now, on the top line of little pictures there, these are what we call direct effects. These are directly linked to the industrial players and the main institutions. So our estimate was that in the final quarter of 2020 that the private and institutional elements of the cluster supported just over 1,400 jobs, made up for about £440 million worth of sales. And now the next bit is important, isn't it? Much of those sales were export sales. Now, I mean, when we're talking about the advantage of sectors, I mean, how do I know if Welsh sectors, are really competitive, really have advantage? Well, we look at their exports, don't we? Are they able to sell goods in overseas markets successfully? I think what's very interesting here is that for the compound semiconductor cluster, yes, over 90% of their sales are export, but many of those sales are outside of the European Union market. So this represents sales to areas such as North America and Asia. So what does that mean in terms of, what does that all mean in terms of a contribution to the economy? Well, we measure the size of the economy in terms of, GVA, GDP, but we estimate that at the end of 2020, the cluster directly contributed just over 120 million pounds of GVA to the Welsh economy. And then finally, an important point, because in those context slides, I was saying, well, look, we have a productivity problem in the Welsh economy. Well, the compound semiconductor cluster is of interest here because it is a sector, particularly the private sector firms that are part of this sector, they tend to be associated with relatively high productivity, labour productivity, for example. So we estimate that at the end of 2020, gross value added per employee in the cluster was about £86,000, which is well over the Welsh average. So what do we have? We have in the compound semiconductor cluster, we have employment that was stable, it's largely maintained in the private and public sector parts of the cluster during the pandemic. And it's more than these direct effects that are detailed at the top of the slide, because the cluster firms, through their spending with local suppliers and through the spending of staffs, so through household spending effects, if you like, of the workers, those involved in the sector, when you build that all in, we estimate that the cluster directly and indirectly contributes around 172 million pounds of gross value added to Wales and around 2,100 full-time equivalent jobs supported. So as I said, that's building in these indirect economic effects as these companies and their workers spend their money in the Welsh economy. And this is a cluster, but unlike many other parts of the manufacturing sector in Wales, at the moment has strong potential for further growth. So I need to start wrapping up here. So what are our conclusions from the economic analysis? Well, my first bullet, relatively high levels of gross value added per employee. So this is a productive sector. We estimate that labour productivity in the sector is around 85% higher than the Welsh average. There's potential to increase the indirect effects in the Welsh economy as firms, as a cluster develops, local purchase will develop, well, that will increase the multiplier effects. Importantly, the relatively high gross value added per employee actually reflects fairly high earnings in the sector as well. So this is a sector that is connected with relatively high earnings. And my conclusion there in the final bullet is that the strengthening of this cluster, given its average productivity characteristics, would work to actually boost Welsh productivity. So, and with very few sectors of regional manufacturing, Welsh manufacturing possessing these types of productivity characteristics. Just my final slide before I hand over. We have a series of different elements of our work, but one of the things that we're seeking to do over the next few years, as well as just looking at the economic impact, some elements of the numbers, we're also seeking to back up the numbers with case study work. So I've detailed on that slide some of the work that we're doing around the cluster in terms of developing case studies around areas such as human capital development, local supply chain development, the development of new infrastructure, internationalization, so prospects for new investment in the cluster, in the area, and cases describing new innovation and new R&D. So I'll leave it there. My time is up. I don't want to steal time from the following speakers. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Max. Very good. And I've got a few questions that I'll save for the Q&A session a little later. But one question that's come in is about the kind of job creation that can be expected from the cluster. I think some of that will be covered in the next two presentations. But essentially, I think one characteristic of our sector is that at least 40% of employees are graduates or higher graduates. We have a large number of PhDs. And I know the truth could be said of the fast food sector, but these are actually relevant degrees. And
the earnings are considerably higher than in the fast food
yes.
sector.
Yeah. So we'll go straight on to the opportunities in the higher education sector. And some of the courses that have been put together specifically around STEM and compound semiconductors and semiconductors in general. So our first presentation is from Owen Guy, and Owen is representing Swansea University and also CSIM, the Centre for Integrative Semiconductor Materials. We heard a little bit about that this morning, so Owen will expand on the educational opportunities within the sector. So over to you, Owen. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. So yes, thanks very much, Chris. And what I wanted to do this afternoon was give you an overview of some of the things happening in the education sector in the sphere of compound semiconductors at postgraduate, undergraduate level, and some of the work we're doing with the compound semiconductor cluster, with further education colleges, and also some of the outreach activities that we're doing with schools and various partners within the cluster and outside the cluster as well. And of course, this is all about generating good quality employees for the sector to go into jobs within the sector partners, but also in terms of jobs with applications areas like electric vehicles, the automotive sector, 5G, 6G, and new emerging technologies like quantum technologies and next generation materials as well. So lots of opportunities, but we need to supply those good students, those good graduates into the industry. So of course, we're working very closely with CSconnected and the cluster partners. We can see on the bottom of the slide there, some of the big partners. And of course, this is, as Max and Chris have alluded to, this is a thriving sector at the moment. There are lots of job opportunities. If you go and look on the websites, the job vacancies pages of all these companies, they're employing at the moment with good jobs, engineering jobs, but also in finance and jobs obviously based in Wales, but in some of the partners based at their other sites as well. So, really good opportunities for high quality jobs. So as Max alluded to, there are thousands of jobs in Wales in this sector, and there are predicted to be thousands more over the next 5 years as some of these growth industries expand, electric vehicles being one, communications, LiDAR. So all these industries are expanding, and therefore they're going to need a skilled workforce with translational skills. This is for, of course, people coming through the school system, come through the university system, but also retraining. So people from other industries wanting to retrain and get into this compound semiconductor sector. So we provide opportunities for a range of levels, from PhD students and master's students, research students, down to undergraduates and of course, apprenticeships as well. And we try and link projects very closely with our company partners. And indeed, we'll explore some of these and give some examples of these in the next few slides. In addition to university-based students, we also have programs where students are based in companies but they do a master's or a PhD part-time. And that's been a very, very effective mechanism for building relationships between the university and the companies, but also as a recruitment vehicle for the companies, because students who might, high quality students who might be thinking of doing research and staying in university, well, they can go into the company and they can continue that research, or they can have those research opportunities. So that's a nice recruitment attraction for people. As I mentioned, we are working in areas in terms of research, electric vehicles and automotive, obviously in power electronics, and we've got big activities with our company partners in that sector, with collaborating with other universities, and particularly with Cardiff in relation to VCSEL projects. New areas such as biophotonics and biomems, and this is exposing students and companies to the cutting edge of technology and what's next on the horizon. And that's really important, that the companies and students and employees get that exposure to what's coming next. Another one of those is quantum technologies. And then there are also recruitment drivers from sectors such as health. So we're getting into these sectors, developing new sensor technologies, for instance, for healthcare and well-being applications. But this is also a really good recruitment vehicle, because lots of students are interested in healthcare and they buy into that healthcare angle. So linking healthcare with compound semiconductors is a very, very useful recruitment vehicle. Okay, so one example of that, which uses next generation materials, is graphene sensors. And these are biosensors being developed using semiconductor technologies, and they're applied in the detection of hepatitis virus. So this is real-time detection of hepatitis virus. And of course, this has now become equally applicable to COVID detection. So we've got projects which are developing COVID sensors. So all these topics are covered both at undergraduate level, but also in a new bespoke and specific course, semiconductor technology and applications course, which is an MSc, which will come online from this October. So please, anybody interested, or of anybody interested in this sector and wants to get into it, then this is a very good vehicle to do that. And of course, the projects on this MSc, the research projects, will be directly linked to industry and our cluster partners. There's an overview of the MSc. Any more details, if anyone wants more details, then please do get in touch with me or Swansea University. Of course, in order to provide an attractive course, an attractive proposition to students, then we have to have the facilities. And I think you heard about this morning, but the CISM, Centre for Integrative Semiconductor Materials, is a new £30 million fab on the beach, we call it, at our new Bay campus. And that will give students studying at Swansea that state-of-the-art experience and direct translational skills which are suitable for employment within the cluster. There are graduates, of course, coming through both Cardiff and Swansea, but there aren't really enough, and they don't have currently they don't have exactly the skills needed. So that's what we're trying to put in place with our degree programs and this new master's course. Of course, we're also targeting the pipeline, the talent pipeline, and working on outreach with the likes of Techniquest. So the cluster has an exhibit at Techniquest in Cardiff. We're also giving outreach lectures to schools. So tomorrow I have an outreach lecture to around 400 school children on the chemistry of the smartphone. And of course, we engage in projects such as microneedles. So microneedles inspired by the mosquito, the proboscis of the mosquito is a tiny needle which sticks into you, pain-free. You don't feel it until later. And that can be used for drug delivery, but it also can be used for vaccine delivery and diagnostics. And vaccine delivery, of course, we have in mind delivery of the COVID vaccine. And this is a project that we've undertaken with SPTS. And of course, as well as being a worthwhile project from a research and health perspective, it also helps us to engage with people who from outside the sector. So we're also developing bespoke courses, CPD courses, which are short courses, online courses, as well as practical courses for employees within the sector. And we'll roll those out to some further education colleges as well. And finally, we are working with the organization SEMI, who represents the global semiconductor industry. We held, or we were due to hold the talent forum, the SEMI Talent Forum last March. That got cancelled, unfortunately, because of COVID. But we're working closely with SEMI, who are now running a series of online events, and that's free for our students to attend. And then the final thing I wanted to mention is our work with Outreach and the Dragons regional rugby team. So this is promoting STEM at all levels, but to primary school, right through secondary school and up to university level. And it's utilizing the huge target audience that the Dragons have. They reach over 40,000 school children per year, and they have obviously a huge social media following. So that's something we want to tap into and use for the benefit of the cluster, and obviously for the benefit of people wanting to work with the cluster and in the cluster. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Owen. Great overview there. I have to ask, do you use Fab on the Beach as part of the marketing campaign for recruiting?
So we will be. This MSc has just been approved, so it's being marketed at the moment. And of course, CISM opening next July will be used as a marketing tool for that, of course, yes. Yeah,
excellent. Okay, thank you very much for that. One thing I would emphasize that fits with both what Owen has said and what Peter, I'm sure, will say, is that there are two strands to the education elements. One is to meet the needs of the organic growth of the existing, the incumbent organizations within the cluster, but also part of the aim is to attract in industry and startups on the basis that Wales is a great place to be, particularly if you want a career in compound semiconductors. However, we also want to attract in foreign direct investment further along the supply chain. And of course, one of the first questions you get asked is, do you have the skills in the region? And so it's important that we make sure that we have the provision in place for the skills pipeline to meet not only existing demand, but the future demand. And so that's where there's a lot of emphasis. And Owen mentioned the outreach activities across the cluster, even though it may only be a dozen or a couple of dozen organizations, we do actively get involved across the whole cluster in a number of outreach activities. So watch this space. Right, without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Peter Smowton from Cardiff University and ICS, and also of the CDT. So I'll let Peter cover all of those aspects. Thank you, Pete.
Thanks, Chris. Yes, this morning I talked about research activities, and today I'm going to talk, or this afternoon I'm going to talk about training activities in CSconnected. As Chris said, both in some detail about what Cardiff does, but also what we're trying to do for the in regional support. So Cardiff University, as I explained this morning, has divided its activity in compound semiconductors into these three areas: facility, that's the Institute for Compound Semiconductors Research, things like the Compound Semiconductor Manufacturing Hub, and training. And one of the real pillars of excellence within that training is the Compound Semiconductor Manufacturing Centre for Doctoral Training. So I'm going to continue to talk more about the skills and a little bit about Strength in Places and what that's trying to do for skills in the region. So starting with what Cardiff offers currently, an MSc in Compound Semiconductors, either with a physics emphasis or an electronics emphasis. And I probably should say that the physics emphasis is actually probably a photonics emphasis. Both of these MSCs were designed in collaboration with the Compound Semiconductor Cluster, trying to address what our cluster partners said they needed. They're both 1 year, 12-month programs offered since 2018, with taught modules for 2/3 of the time and a research project for 1/3 of the time. I won't go through all the elements that make up those MSCs, but what I do want to emphasize is the focus on practical skills. We're doing a lot of clean room practical skills, fabrication skills. We're doing a lot of experimental skills, and we're doing a lot of software development skills. And those are the very things that our industrial partners asked for. So, for example, on the physics photonics side, programming skills in LabVIEW for controlling experiments and systems, but also software tools for design of components, for example, application-specific photonic integrated circuits. So taking students all the way through from designing those initial physical processes and the circuits to support those, then also translating those designs using industry standard software into the information that has to be submitted to foundries to enable those circuits to be actually produced. And that's the path that we take those students through. We expose them to a variety of different software packages from different, but all of them industry standard. We do have a dedicated teaching and learning space, and we do base it around research group and research specialisms as well, so that those projects are all done in very high quality research areas. So interacting with world-leading researchers and our local compound semiconductor industry. The Centre for Doctoral Training, this is PhD level training now. Again, this was designed in collaboration with the Compound Semiconductor Cluster, and in fact also drawing in information from companies throughout the UK and what they all needed. It's funded by the UK Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council, £6.5 million worth of funding over 5 intakes of students. It's led by Cardiff University with partners in the University of Manchester, Sheffield and UCL. And what the students get is a fully funded PhD studentship, which includes stipend for living costs, tuition fees, and research training support grants. There will be 5 intakes in all. We've had 2 already. We started in October 2019, and the last intake is in October 2023. We're targeting a total of 65 PhD students, with, as I said, the engineering and physical sciences basically funding an amount that equates to 40 of those students, and co-funding from the universities and from industry for a further 25. So what's the vision for that CDT? What's really special about it? Well, it is an essential part of the cluster, but also drives activity throughout the whole of the UK from this centre in South Wales. The really critical things we think we do, which are different to a standard PhD, are that instead of just focusing on a specific area, which most PhD students do, and perhaps losing sight of where their work fits within the whole context, what we do is we give the students the chance to study the context before they do their detailed research PhD project. So they understand the whole manufacturing supply chain from materials to applications and see where their work actually fits within that. They're also then connected to other students who are working in different parts of that manufacturing supply chain, which again brings a richness and an understanding. The other thing we really do, which is quite unusual, is we want to embed manufacturability from day one, so that when people dream up new research solutions, they're thinking about how they will be made from the very start. And what that means is we should be able to translate those research solutions to manufacturable solutions much more easily, and a much larger proportion of them. We, again, just like the MSCs, we focus on hands-on design and fabrication skills, both for electronics and photonics, using compound semiconductors. And we're also showing students the manufacturing approaches that have been developed for silicon and how they can be applied to compound semiconductors and how they are being applied to compound semiconductors. And then finally, there's a very strong link between industry and academic researchers, and all of the students have both industry and academic supervisors. So it is a 1+3 PhD, as I've said. It starts with the MSc. It goes on to do the detailed research project. Those projects can be done at any one of the 4 partner universities. Obviously, all of those universities have excellent facilities, and there are these extremely strong links to in future employers as well. The 4 years is essentially divided up in this way, such that the students do those MSc modules and training activities that I described earlier. But in addition, during that first year, they are choosing their PhD project and planning their PhD project during the first year, with a lot of training in how to do that, so that they really hit the ground running for their PhD research activity in years 2 to 4. And I think one element that is really, again, very novel is that much of that taught material is actually taught by industry partners. So we have, for example, experts from industry teaching some of the industry standard software activities. We have what we call manufacturing method seminars, which are given by our industry partners, again, explaining to the students what happens all along that manufacturing supply chain. So how industry works on epitaxial wafer growth, how it works on applications, packaging, all the things in between. Let me crack on. So the third strand of activity is in continuing professional development. And I really want to talk now about what the Strengthening Places Fund is doing here for CPD in the region. We're building on a successful pilot that was delivered by Cardiff University in 2018, looking at training to upskill people and to reskill people into activities in compound semiconductor electronics and photonics. And there's a picture of Daryl Beggs actually giving that or at least one of those sets of courses at an industrial partner. I won't say which one. But I thought I'd show you the picture because it was at a time when people actually could do it face to face. What we aim to do with this CPD, though, is go much beyond that and reach over 25% of the expanded workforce, which will, by 2025, be more than 1,000 employees we aim to reach. We aim to do this in a way that is very collaborative. So we're working with all of our 12 Strengthening Places partners. Those are the cluster partners you've seen, but also additional local further education and higher education providers, and also private sector specialists and things like e-learning technologies. What we're trying to do is really find those synergies with outreach and engagement activities, and making sure that our CPD programs do the right things to encourage things like career progression for women in these technologies. Okay, and finally, just to sort of summarize what we're aiming to do with our CPD, as I said, it's training in the new skills, the latest developments. It's upskilling people within their existing roles, and it's also reskilling people to move roles within an organization. For example, moving from the silicon technologies to the newer compound semiconductor technologies. And within the region, what we're doing is, as I said, working strategically with our partners, developing activities that go all the way from outreach, that early effort at perhaps school levels, all the way through apprenticeships, degrees. I haven't described Cardiff, but Owen described Swansea earlier. MSCs in compound semiconductor technologies, now adding the one from Swansea that again Owen described, and also this PhD training. And the pinnacle is not is to do with the numbers of people doing it. Obviously, we have very many fewer needing to do PhDs compared with the people needing to do, for example, apprenticeships in these areas. But this is an industry, as was said by Max right at the start, that does have a very large fraction of degree and PhD level people required. Okay, I shall stop there and pass you back to Chris.
Great, thanks very much for that, Peter, and another great overview, and actually an example of what's going on in the region that perhaps is not immediately obvious, and there may not be a great awareness of. We've had a couple of questions. I don't know if we can bring back Max and Owen. And as if by magic, we all appear. That's great, thank you. I think the first one relates to a comment from Max about the investments in the area, just some sort of feel for what kind of technologies are driving the investments. I can kick off with, I know sensing is one of the big ones right now, but also it's more about some of the new and emerging technologies, particularly LiDAR, but also wide bandgap materials for electric drive vehicles. I don't know if there are any other areas that we're seeing that in, if anyone would like to comment right now.
I suppose I could add something just to generalize a bit further on what you've said, Chris, the electric vehicles, but also autonomous vehicles, robotics. So again, the sensors, the LiDAR type sensing is essential for those kinds of activities. I guess the other really important one is energy efficiency, the carbon footprint. Compound semiconductor technologies are just drastically reducing the amount of carbon that's being emitted. Just take normal white lighting, for example. That is a compound semiconductor technology now, which starts out more expensive, but ends up being a lot cheaper in the long run and just burns a fraction of the electricity, which is a great outcome.
Absolutely, thank you. And Owen, I think there were some historical links in particular with West Wales, but across both Cardiff and Swansea with the likes of Rolls-Royce and so on. So we do have a long-term historic link with automotive, but of course a lot of the new links are coming from the likes of Jaguar Land Rover, Nissan and so on. Are there any existing links that we have in West Wales with some of the drivetrain organisations?
So we had historic links with some transport companies like Alstom and Arriva, and of course now we've got links with some of the automotive JLR you mentioned. Obviously, we've got a big power electronics activity in Swansea through Mike Jennings, and that's at the heart of linking with those kind of transport companies, really. So both in silicon carbide, gallium nitride, and of course the new material gallium oxide, which is very interesting for the future. Yeah,
I've seen a lot of interest coming in from the likes of Japan on that. In fact, I noticed that there's some data out showing that Taiwan is the leading global supplier now by a long way of logic chips and Korea of memory chips. I'd like to see the chart extended to compound semiconductors and hope that Wales appears on that. Max, you mentioned the traditional industries and a lot of early stage foreign direct investment going back a while that has been gradually pulling out and then changing the shape of the workforce. An impression I've got, but I may be totally wrong on this, is that Wales has really promoted itself as a low wage economy historically. And obviously that scenario is totally different to what we're trying to encourage now with the compound semiconductor sector. Is that reasonable? And is there more we can do?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there is a little bit of a danger of generalising, but I think if we went back to the 1980s and the 1990s, I mean, over that period, particularly if you took a slice 1982 to 1992, there were some years when Wales was attracting close to 16 to 20% the inward investment projects and jobs coming to the UK. But what Wales offered at that time was you obviously had the access to consumer markets in the southeast, access to the ports, low factor costs, relatively low labour costs, connected with quite high productivity labour. I think the difficulty was that many of those inward investors that came in during the 1980s and 1990s, so you could take the Japanese as a case of that. Wales was very successful at attracting Japanese manufacturing investment. Well, they're not there. Many of them have gone now, and they've gone now because the products came to the end of their life cycle, and the production of those goods has moved further east. So we've lost our advantage. So I see the inward investment in the compound semicon clusters quite different from much of that actually characterized the 1980s and 1990s, largely because of the focus on R&D and the focus, as colleagues were saying earlier, on the type of employment that they're offering. It's very high quality employment that they're offering for our best graduates.
And I would also emphasize, I think Owen showed a chart of the types of roles that the industry and that the other partners are seeking. And it shouldn't be forgotten that as well as the high-tech jobs and the direct design and manufacture of the technology, we're also seeking IT, administration, finance, all of the other roles that support successful businesses, academia, and obviously other NGOs. Do you see any particular challenges? And this is open to anyone now. We want to attract people into our sector. We also want to address the diversity, gender balance, and so on as well, which is traditionally in engineering and manufacturing. Do we need to do something to change our image? Is there a better way of perhaps attracting students that will eventually come on to the job opportunities within the sector? And is there more that CSconnected can do?
Well, Chris, I think it's very much down to something you've talked about before. It's the Intel Inside problem. It's that the technology is so incredibly exciting, but actually it's hidden within lots of these eventual end users. So people are excited by net zero, but they don't appreciate that actually working on compound semiconductor devices is the way to make it happen. And if we could spread that knowledge around a bit more and give, for example, school kids the information that is where the excitement is, then perhaps we'd get many more people coming through.
And we're back to outreach, yes.
Absolutely. I think Peter's spot on there. It's the lack of awareness of semiconductors and compound semiconductors amongst the general population and school children and students. And I think that's where our outreach programs come in. That's where the publicity comes in. And obviously we're starting to do a lot more of that now, and hopefully that will have an impact.
And Max, on a comparator with other countries, I was actually quite astounded. Before lockdown, 2 or 3 years ago, we had a visit from some Asian students that were actually looking to join and enroll at Cardiff University, and they all had electronics, physics, and photonic background, and I'd say the gender mix was about 50-50, which is significantly different to what we see from our homegrown student base. Any feeling at all? I know it's a bit of a how long is a piece of string, but any feeling at all about what is happening differently in Asia to in the Western world? Because this is an issue across Europe and North America.
I can't comment specifically on that, but I would say one thing. I mean, I think one of the challenges that we do have in our new politico-economic environment is keeping some of those best overseas graduates that train here, that develop here, is keeping some of that talent within the regional economy. I mean, I don't doubt some of that talent will disappear out to the wider UK economy, and much of it will go back home. But I think there is a real challenge there to try and keep some of those best graduates, and critically try and encourage our best graduates not to just accept that they will end up working for a firm, perhaps a member of a cluster in the long term, but getting them to think about actually setting up their own enterprises. I mean, that's the sort of activity I think we really want to see. We want to see a mix of players in this sector. I appreciate huge scale economies in the compound semiconductor cluster, but there is still scope and space for new enterprise development, and we want to see our best students spinning out into those new enterprises, starting those new enterprises. Not answering your question there, Chris, but
but actually you raised another one, and that is there a way of building in some form of entrepreneurism into our existing MSc, doctorate, but also undergraduate courses to encourage the startup culture?
And I think you saw in our MScs and PhDs there were modules in commercializing innovation and very much thinking about how to make sure that the science and the commerce went together, because they reinforce each other. Of course, we need both to be a high-tech society. We need both things.
Yeah. And I guess looking back at Silicon Valley to the early days, some of that was inherent in the culture within the region, but I guess there's also the question about getting to a critical mass. We seem to be close to it, where you're the go-to place where if someone wants a career in semiconductors, this is where they come, and largely because you're not limited to just one organization. When you can see that there's a multitude of opportunities, then your career is not limited, and that there are potential avenues. So hopefully we're not far off getting to that critical mass, and we'll be able to keep building on that. I'm going to wrap up very shortly, unless there are any final points anyone would like to make. No, all I'll say is that on CSconnected.com website, there is a skills page. We'll be adding to that with some of the information on these courses that are available, and also Max's last baseline report, which I think was it June or May? I think it was May. It is available in full on the website. So if you want to read more about that, that's the place to go, csconnected.com. And
I think we're just about to end, I guess was what he was about to say. So I guess we just say thank you to everyone. And as Chris said, plenty of information on the website to find out more if you're interested, which I hope you are. Sorry, Chris, I was just...
No, thanks very much for that. I've found that if I scroll down in private chat too far, it kicks me out. So I've just discovered that right at the very end. But thanks to all of this afternoon's speakers, and of course to this morning's speakers. So thanks, Peter, Owen, and Max. I think that's been a great insight into both the economics of the region, based around compound semiconductors, and the opportunities from the academic institutes, and also another illustration of how the whole cluster is working together as one cohesive unit. So I think it's really got that message across, and that really consolidates what we were talking about this morning when we heard from speakers from, again, education and also from business. So thanks to all of today's speakers. Thanks to Georgia, who's been managing and driving the process in the background and sorting out some of the technical glitches, and also a thanks to my team and my colleagues Jesse and Camille, who have pulled the day together and sorted the agenda and dealt with day-to-day inquiries. I think it's been very useful, very successful. And I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in and taking time out to hear about what we have to offer in the region, exciting opportunities in compound semiconductors, and long may it continue. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you for watching. Rewatch all of our sessions online. Thank you to our partners.